Good evening. This is On the Campaign Trail. Every week we track key issues, moments, and personalities in the long run up to Election Day. But we want to be clear about the map we use. We know that the democratic project is in great danger, and that shapes how we navigate our way to 2022. It isn't just elections as usual. On the campaign trail seeks to make sense of the 2022 elections. We will try to discern patterns in the election landscape, determine paths to victory, discuss relevant policies, seek useful perspectives, all while keenly aware that the anti democratic clock is ticking. In 2022, hashtag we decide. Without neglecting the other basic questions, on the campaign trail, we'll ask how we decide and why we decide. I'm John Nery, and you are on the campaign trail. You must have seen them too: volunteer created signs, volunteer driven events, volunteer sponsored ads, and billboards. The Leni Robredo for President campaign started late, but it seems to have been absorbed into a supporter led movement. In some ways, all of these remind us of the many volunteers who drove the Duterte campaign in 2016. In other ways, these remind us of Cory Aquino's campaign in the snap election of 1986. Is all of this for real? We are joined tonight in our first segment by Leni volunteers: Dan Sonko of Team Leni Robredo, Yvette Fernandez, and shortly, Aurelio Servando of Iloilo, who is with the Robredo People's Council. Good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here, John. It's always good to
Hi,
see you.
Hi, John. Thanks for having us.
Thanks again for joining us. Dan, what are some of the things you've been a part of that you've helped put together?
Well, as you know, it's been exciting times in the Leni campaign, and we helped put together the motorcade that was hugely successful, and then just last weekend we also put up the Lugawan ng Tropa, which is the sort of the national Lugaw Day. So those are mainly the things that I've been involved with personally.
When Aurelio Servando from Iloilo joins us, I'm going to ask him almost the exact same thing because he's been involved also in organizing these large scale events. But I also want to go micro. Yvette, you almost immediately went on leave from your job after Vice President Robredo announced her candidacy. What exactly have you volunteered for?
Okay, so as soon as she announced, I immediately wrote her. I wrote different people on her staff, and I said I wanted to volunteer. And then I went to my boss and I said I'd like to go on leave because the problem with my work, because I worked in a large corporation, we're not really allowed to state any political preferences, even via hashtag. So I remember that first day, everybody went pink, and our boss said, "I'm assuming that's all for breast cancer awareness." And we're like, "Yeah, pink for breast cancer awareness." So I think, so I wrapped up some stuff at work for the next week, and then I went on leave officially October 15th. Um, and since then, I've just been working in a mishmash, hodgepodge of different things. I am part of the group of Barry, which is the press office of the OVP. And then I'm part of the group, the communications group of Timmy Aquino and Marlon Rivera. Nagbabatuhan lang ng mga ideas. And recently, I joined part of the KOL and the PR group, and now part of this music group, um, doing different things. So yeah, it's just a hodgepodge. Oh, and I'm also the the manager of the Rocco the Pug TikTok account. That's officially my entry into the world of TikTok.
TikTok.
Once maybe later I want to go back and ask you exactly, what kind of table of organization is there in the campaign. Um, Dan, Yvette, talked about the color pink, and this has always been given as an example of how the campaign has been people led. That it was the choice of the supporters. I mean, it wasn't really the OVP or her staff. Is that in fact true? I mean, would you know how the color was chosen or
Well,
how
Yvette might
people
be the
came
better
to
person
pick?
to ask because she's the advertising person. I'm really not aware.
But when you started organizing the events, or you helped organize the events, the color pink had already been chosen.
Oh
Is
yeah,
that, is
it,
that
it
right?
was the it was the mandatory color for everyone. So uh, we just rode onto it.
If that, can you do you have an idea exactly how that was chosen, who chose that, and then who
I think,
decided
yeah.
to just go with it?
From what I understand, they had been talking. I mean, this is what VP Leni had said, no? From what I understand, when people were pushing her to run, there were mga not volunteers, I guess volunteers, but not part of the official campaign yet, because wala pang official campaign yet. There are different groups who have been urging her to run for months now, and there were some volunteers who were tying pink ribbons outside her office. So supposedly she saw those ribbons, and when they were talking about what color, she just said, "Look, people are already using pink. Our supporters are already using pink, so let's go for pink." But basically, it's a people's movement, people's it's grassroots. Basically, so many volunteers, so many people getting involved in from the smallest aspect to more bigger, to much bigger responsibilities. But it's just like all purely volunteer more than anything. So that's how it started. The pink, kakam pink.
Yeah, Dan, I want to ask you. Maybe we can talk some the economics of a volunteer campaign. I mean, surely these things cost, right?
Yeah.
Organizing a caravan would cost. Organizing a free lugaw event would cost. Can you give us an idea of the costs involved?
You will be surprised, John, as I am, that it hardly cost us anything, from our group, because everything was spent by the volunteers. And I think that's the wonder of this campaign. I would be embarrassed to tell you how much money we spent from where we are, because all the expense was largely borne by the volunteers. Even on the Lugawan event last Saturday, it was a very ridiculously small budget that we spent. So we're really counting on volunteer power here, not just in terms of physical activity, physical energy, but also in terms of real cash that's being spent for the activities. That's the wonder of this campaign.
So I can understand from the point of view of an organizer like you, or of your group. You would be thinking of like a centralized budget, but you don't really have much need for that because the volunteers themselves are spending.
Yeah.
But do you think? Can you give us an idea of, let's say, if I were a volunteer and I was going to have a free lugaw event in my place, I would feed 300. Like, do you have any idea how much would that cost? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
also
well
real money, right?
we have a small subsidy for lugaw events, which are done
Mhm.
on a weekly basis. Every Wednesday on Pink Wednesdays, our group provides a small lugaw subsidy for different groups that want to do a lugawan. And just to give an idea, 1,500 pesos would feed about 200 to 250 people with lugaw. Of course, this is a small bowl. It's not something that
Sure.
will really fill you up, but that's just the amount that's spent.
Wow, that goes a long way, right? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you. We're joined now by Aurelio Servando, who is part of the Robredo People's Council. He's joining us from Iloilo. He just traveled from Bacolod. Thank you very much, Aurelio, for making time for our show.
Yeah, sorry to be late.
Oh, that's all right. I know that you were on the road, and because that was because the boat was late. I started by asking Dan and Yvette, from their own perspective, what have they done in your own case? Can you tell us some of the things that you've done as a Leni volunteer and a Leni organizer, as an organizer of Leni volunteers?
Uh, do you want to know what we've done after she declared or before she declared? Even
Okay,
before.
that's great. Let's do a before and after. So before she declared, what did you do?
Well, even before she declared, we already had the Luga ones here in Iloilo. We were literally trying to convince her to throw her hat into the ring by letting it be known to her that we're willing to help her all the way and that she shouldn't worry because if she has no money, because the people will definitely support her. So right after we learned that she was going to finally declare, we organized a motorcade in 36 hours, and we were able to get about 300 participants. After that, we had a walkathon recently and a bike run. Where in the case of the walkathon, we had about 2,000 participants. So in one feeding alone, in one day, we had 300 sites where we fed people. All of this geared towards uh, letting people know that she's a good candidate and that they should also be rooting for her.
I want to ask you the same question I asked Dan, which is about costs. If you can give us an idea, how much does a volunteer campaign like this really cost? But before I ask that, I want to ask you, how did you get started? Like how many months before Vice President Robredo decided, did you decide to gather people together and try to get her to decide?
Well, actually, when Duterte was already showing his fans, when it was already quite evident that we really needed a change of leadership, we have been pushing her to provide that kind of change. And in talks with her on several occasions, we've been virtually imploring her, begging her to give us hope that she will run. And for a while, we were, of course, we were afraid that she might back out. But when she did announce that she was going to run last October 5, we were, of course, euphoric about it. We were all very happy.
Now, can I ask you the question I asked Dan? Can you give us an idea of the costs involved? So, for instance, you had that Lugawan with 300 sites. How much did like the centralized group spend, and how much did each of the sites end up spending?
Actually, very negligible because some you can cook a cauldron of luga for about 500 to 1,000 pesos,
Mhm.
and we had a lot of people who were willing to shell out that amount. So it didn't really cost a few people a big amount of money, but a lot of people shared in the expense. Maybe I could share with you that in Iloilo alone, there are about 300 doctors who are members of the Doctors for Leni. There are 3,000 educators who are members of Educators for Leni, and about 100 to 150 lawyers for Leni. So definitely we have a lot of membership here in Iloilo.
Thank you. If I can ask Yvette, I have a question about coordination. So Yvette, you're part of the OVP. You volunteer as part of the OVP, but also you're also part of the campaign team. Um, how does the OVP and the campaign structure coordinate with different volunteer organizers? How does it work?
I think, well, I'm not part of the upper echelon part. I'm just one of the minions that I mentioned earlier. But I think they're all connected, no? They work closely with Team Lenny Robredo and other volunteer groups. So actually, as mentioned earlier, some of the volunteer groups were already set up and very well coordinated like months ago. And the volunteer group of the OVP started really literally when she announced. So it's been really great seeing how the other how well coordinated the other volunteer groups have been, and like I personally coordinate a lot with the communications teams of other volunteer groups.
Can you give us an idea of how the messaging is put together? I mean, is there a central desk, that lines up? These are the key messages of the day, and then disseminates it, or is it the other way around? I mean, you look at what your volunteers have done, and then out of that you create a coherent message. How does it work as far as messaging is concerned?
Yeah, there's a central messaging team. Bam Aquino is the campaign manager, and then there's
Yeah,
a
sure.
central messaging team, and Bam sends out every few days sends out campaign updates, and yeah, to basically to all of the volunteers in the different uh, the different what do you call it? It's a tier, right? The different groups, and he basically it's a central nervous system of the team.
All
Yeah,
right.
you
Go
know
ahead, Dan.
the wonder of this campaign is what Yvette describes the central messaging effort. The reality is on the ground, all the different groups have their own messages. They have their own gimmicks, and somehow it seems like they're trying to outdo each other. And that's the vibrance of this campaign. Not that they don't follow the central messaging, that's the guidance that's provided by BAM. No? But in our case, for instance, when we issue our guidelines and we tell them this is the hashtag which they all religiously follow, but the way they would describe the guidance of the message that you provide is it's mind-boggling. They're so creative. They would create their own materials. We provide them with the with central material, central design, but they would change that design, to their liking, and we don't say no to that, because that's the character of this campaign. So sometimes some people say, ang gulo-gulo naman niyang Leni, ang dami-daming iba-ibang message, ang daming iba't ibang tagline. You cannot compare this to a traditional campaign. This is a people's campaign, and we have to learn to understand it that way. And I think that's our path to victory.
So, in fact, I do want to ask all three of you. That's the central question. Is it a campaign or is it a movement? Maybe I can start with Aurelio, and then Dan, and then Yvette.
Well, definitely, it's more than just a campaign because in a campaign, you have a candidate who presents himself as the best person for a position and then comes out with the money so that he will be able to propagate his message. And then the people will be asked to support it. But in this case, iba parang baliktad. It was the people who were literally begging Leni to finally cast her to make her decision to run, no? And then all sorts of efforts were made to give her the assurance that she doesn't have to worry about funds and that people will contribute to make it possible for her. No? So baliktad ang nangyari. So this is really more than just a campaign. I believe it's a movement. I could even compare it to a Swiss movement in a watch where you have 1,000 parts all working independently of each other, but all geared towards making the watch give accurate time. No? So here we have a movement, marami mga taong involved, but all geared towards making her win in 2022.
I find that metaphor very interesting, no? Because I know that Vice President Leni likes to use that metaphor. No? She thinks in terms of many moving parts.
She does.
Uh, yeah, she does, right? Yeah. Dan, can you expand on what you said earlier? It's a people's campaign. Is it really? I mean, what makes it a people's campaign?
Well, John, I was involved in both people's campaign and a traditional political campaign. And I think this is a hybrid, really, because what Aurelio described earlier as the traditional campaign structure, that's a command structure. No? There's someone on top, and everybody else follows, gives the command. No? In this case, it's very dynamic. No? There's a lot of energy coming from below. Just the way that Yvette described how the color pink was adopted is characteristic of the way the decisions are made in this campaign. So the energy of the volunteers fuel the decision making, and the decisions once they are made, as Yvette described, when BAM provides guidance. I said earlier that people don't necessarily follow, but the truth is they do. They do, but they adapt it to their own in their own language, in their own way of expression. So I think it's a hybrid. It's not the usual. I have never seen anything like this. I've been involved in political life and development work in this country for about 35 years. This is the first time I'm seeing something like this. It's really unique.
Thank you. Yvette?
Yes, I personally think it's a movement as well. So many people have gotten involved. Like everybody I know is wants to be involved somehow, and they're all, like, as mentioned earlier by Dan and Aurelio, they're spending their own money for it. Um, I mean, lots of family members, lots of friends, they're printing their own T-shirts. Robert Alejandro has put together a file, a Google Drive with so many different designs that people just have to access that and print it. So they're printing T-shirts, stickers, tarps, even all the Luga ones. A lot of people who are doing those Luga ones are printing those tarps, which Robert Alejandro designed. And it just, there's so much energy, there's so much positivity. I think that's another thing also that's very noticeable in this campaign. A lot of the volunteers of Leni are focusing on what she said, yung mas radikal ang magmahal. So they're focusing on the positive, focusing on the good, focusing on volunteering, on spreading um, the news of what Leni is. She's goodness, that she is mahusay, she's matibay, that she really wants to change the Philippines for the better, and that basically she loves the Filipino people, and she's doing this for them.
But the mas radikal ang magmahal, that's from Leni herself, right? I mean, that's Vice President Leni. Aurelia, I'm just curious. When that came out, how did your network respond to it? I mean,
Which one?
yung sabi mas
Mas
radikal ang
radical.
magmahal. Mhm.
It took, we had some resistance against it because as human beings, we wanted to be, to fight tooth with tooth and to fight fire with fire. But when she came out with that, we sort of recalibrated ourselves and we followed their suit, we followed their example, and we're still trying to do that. It's quite hard, but definitely we will follow her because we admire her and we realize that that is what she wants to be implemented all over the country. Um, and the point, energy was mentioned a while ago, and really, I'm 61 years old and I've never worked this hard before in my life.
Why is that? I mean, can I ask you? I mean, earlier you talked about this is the fight for our lives event, right? Aurelio, you said you've never worked as hard before. Uh,
Well, actually, ever since I was a young adult, it has always been my dream that someday we will have a leader who will be able to assume power, who will be swept into a position na wala siyang gastos, wala siyang utang na loob sa mga vested interest, and we will have a leader na competent, honest, and yung mga proven track record, proven na masipag. So we have everything in Leni, and now I'm glad that at least I was able to witness it in my lifetime. No, so this is a big chance we have, and we intend to take advantage of it. We want to see her sit in Malacanang, and hopefully she can start a trend where we will have competent and servant leaders like her, no, from here on. Kailangan natin siya eh.
Thank you, Aurelio. I have a question for Yvette and Dan. We know that, at least in the Philippine context, presidential elections are won in part because of the so-called air war, advertising. Um, can a movement actually raise enough funds to advertise in a significant way, without the candidate incurring a debt of obligation to big donors.
Go ahead, Yvette.
Well, right now, in this day and age, it's all about social media as well. So it's not only about air or
There.
the air, I mean, what on broadcast media, I think. But so many people I know also don't even watch television anymore. The younger generation, they're all on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter. So if since the campaign doesn't have as much money as the rivals or the other candidates, there's always social media and just getting the word out, just starting from the ground as well. And I think with all of her volunteers, with all of the people who really believe in what she does, there's so many people out there just spreading the news also with this whole new digital landscape. And so I think even without the funds for bigger spending, as far as ads are concerned, there's still a lot, a groundswell of support from everywhere else.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, I think definitely we have to fight the air war. No? It is uh, you cannot you cannot renege on that space. However, the resources of the opponent is humongous. No? We've seen how they have revised history in the past decade, and how they have flooded social media and how they have brainwashed people to believe that this is a great family and this is a great potential leader. That's what we're up against, and it's very difficult to fight that on social media. But we see our friends, our allies, our colleagues in the campaign doing their damn best to fight fake news, to now go toe to toe with the trolls. However, I think this war, this campaign cannot just be fought on the ground, on the air war. There has to be a ground war as well. We have to have our volunteers going toe to toe with the adversaries, and trying to convince them. You know? But act the way Leni does, act the way Leni wants us to act, and in the way that we do, we are able to convince the adversaries, the people who support the other candidate, that we are better people, that we offer better life for them, that we offer a better kind of nation uh, to them. So I think it has to be both an air war and a ground war, but I think it has to be very well coordinated. And again, the power of this candidate of Leni Robredo, is the tremendous volunteer power that she has on the ground. I think we need to take advantage of that, because the opponents do not have that kind of power. We have heard of barangay officials being paid an allowance of between 10 to 30,000 a month this early, and that's scary, because you can imagine how many of those are already receiving allowances at this point. But when we talk to the people below them, the people in the barangay, that doesn't trickle down. So we're able to still communicate with them and introduce to them Leni Dobredo, who has been shut out by the algorithm in their social media accounts, and they are amazed. Some of them are actually surprised that there is such a person, there's such a candidate. So that is the essence of the ground war. We have to go out there and introduce Leni, because she has been shut out on social media.
Thank you. My next question is for Aurelio and Dan. No? What are the post-election implications of being part of a movement? I'm sure the focus right now is on winning, right? So it might be too early to think, what will happen after you win. But I'm just curious. There must be. Uh, the fact that you see yourselves as a movement, and the movement wins the presidency, that should have an impact on the way the presidency is run. Maybe just some quick thoughts, Aurelio and Dan, about what kind of impact that movement will have on governance.
Well, yes, actually, that has already crossed our minds several times. I've been emphasizing that in our meetings that this battle is not only until May of 2022, but it could be until 2028 and even beyond, no? Because, of course, now that we've succeeded in convincing Leni to run, we have to make sure that she has everything she needs to be able to run the government, the country well. No? So we need to sort of shield her from the bad and corrupt elements that may still be around and that would be very much interested in getting hold of the power that she has by then. So, pinag-uusapan namin, sabi namin, hindi to hanggang May 2022 lang kailangan tuloy-tuloy itong pagtulong kay Leni until she steps down on in 2028 and even after that, no? Talagang this could be our last chance for our country to really turn it around, you know, to strengthen our institutions and to bring back decency and morality into government. And she can't do this alone, no? So we really have to continue to sacrifice for the country from here on, not just during the election.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe my last question. I don't know why there's a feedback. Is for Yvette and Aurelio. Anong sagot niyo dun sa mga paratang na elitista daw ang kampanya?
Yvette, you want to go ahead?
Elitista. I think that she has been able to reach people of all segments of society. I mean, if you see how she is, you know, when she communicates with the people from, you know, different levels, different stratum, I think people are saying elitista because they see people posting on social media in makakamping or whatever. But there are so many people involved. There's so many people who are you know, the cashew vendor here outside our supermarket, the angkas drivers, the Grab drivers who deliver our food. They have stickers at the back of their motorcycles. There's just so many people who actually even our own kasambahay at home. Every Wednesday they wear these pink t-shirts. They were on the Zoom call with her. I think she has a huge conversion rate every time she talks to anybody. That's why she's been traveling the country. Anybody who listens to her easily gets converted because they can tell how genuine and sincere she is. So all of these people, once she once they get to know her, once they listen to her, they get immediately converted, and they're the ones who start spreading it to the people they know. Our kasambahay here at home are forever forwarding everything we send them to their different families in the provinces. I think it's more than just. I think maybe people say it's elitist because that's what they see on Facebook, but it's actually a much larger group of people, much larger, I don't know, reach that she's been able to touch. And it hasn't, it's not just from this campaign, since the start of the campaign, but also ever since 2013 when she ran for Congress. People have seen her in Camarines Sur. People have seen her when she campaigned for vice president. And everybody who hears her knows that she's the real deal. They know that she's genuine. And maybe the elitists that they see are the ones who they see out there, but it's actually a much deeper and broader segment of society that does support her.
Thank you.
Actually, can I answer it now?
Yes, please.
Ang elitistang tag kay Leni is the worst that they can throw at her. Eh. They cannot throw corrupt or incompetent or tamad, no, at her, because she's obviously none of the above. So the worst that they can do is throw the elitista tag. But when they are told that at several times in the past, Leni, she was very much involved in the people in the Laylayan, no. Not many know that when in her times during that NGO days, yeah, she would even sleep in the houses of the farmers. And there was even one time she slept in a banca when she was already pregnant with her last child. No? So these are rebuttals of the elitista tag. No? So we can easily explain and dispel the elitista because she's not. She's the least elitista among all the candidates that we have right now. No, she lives in an apartment that her in-laws live. She doesn't even own her own house, and very simple ang taste niya. Hindi siya sanay sa mga luxury and branded things, and she takes a bus to go home to Camarines Sur. So talagang wala silang ibang tapon sa kanya kaya elitista na lang, but again we know that it's not true at all.
Thank you. You know, we've devoted more than half an hour to this discussion. I wish we had more time. Maybe we can revisit the Leni volunteers during the official campaign season. But for now, I want to say thank you, Yvette, Aurelio, and Dan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If there is, in fact, a rare phenomenon like a real popular political movement, how should journalists cover it? What are the ethical guidelines to keep in mind, the journalistic landmines to avoid? We asked two professors to join us in our second segment to help make sense of the issue. Professor Rachel Ann Barakias is the chair of the Development Communication Department at Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan. And Professor Felipe Salvosa is the director of the journalism program at the University of Santo Tomas. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Evening, Sir John.
Good evening, John.
Maybe I should ask the baseline question first to both of you. Do you think the Leni campaign is or has elements of a people led movement?
I let Ms. Barakias answer the question first.
Yeah, okay. So, thank you, sir. Yeah, hearing from the answers of your guests a while ago, we can say that it could be a movement because it really focused on people's efforts. It's really more of a bottoms up approach rather than a top down approach. So maybe I can say it's a movement.
Yeah,
Professor
John, I
Salvosa?
would say the same thing. No, the feedback that I'm getting, not just from your guests earlier, no, is that people are really spending their own money, to fuel grassroots campaign for Vice President Robredo. So I would say it has the makings of political movement. But it's not on the same level as the American political movements. No, as you know, the Obama campaign was a movement. The Sanders campaign was a movement. No, the journalists there were writing stories on average campaign contributions. No, which were lower, way lower than usual, to show that the donor base is bigger. No, basically from the grassroots. No? I think Lenny
Again,
Robredo
a
is going
question.
on that direction.
Yeah, thanks. Again, a question for the two of you. Um, should there be a difference in covering a traditional campaign from covering a non-traditional people's-led movement? As a journalist, should there be a difference?
I think this draws the line between the practice of journalism in mass communication lens and in the lens of development communication. Because in the lens of development communication in the undergraduate, what we train our students is that the three values of DevCom is that it's purposive, it's pragmatic, and it's value laden. So in terms of coverage of the elections, whether it's a campaign or a movement, the focus for DevCom coverage would really be, I'd like to note the first thing that you said during the introduction, Sir John, wherein it aims to understand how people decide and why they decide. So should there be an activity, or should a DevCom practitioner be covering a campaign or a movement, whatever it is? It's really more of understanding how that campaign or a movement works in order for them to write or to produce a strategic communication plan, let's say, for example, that they can use for voters' education. So when you understand the motivations of people in a movement, then you also understand, or you get an idea how you also educate your the line.
Thank you. Professor Ipe, should there be a difference?
There shouldn't be any difference if we're talking about the coverage of the campaigns themselves. Our ethical standards do not know any party affiliations. No? So I think the standard rules apply. No, when covering a campaign, no, even if it's organized by grassroots movements, you have to pay your own way. No,
Mhm.
and then you do not become heavily involved in the campaign. You avoid potential conflicts of interest. No? And avoid taking side jobs, no, like working for a campaign. No, these are common issues involving journalists during the elections. Eh.
Thank you. I'll get back to Professor Barakias's point about development communication having a different point of view as far as coverage is concerned. Uh, what else should a journalist prepare for when she's about to cover people's led campaign? So you meet the minimum standards that Professor Ipe pointed out, but what else should a uh, reporter covering a movement prepare for?
I think personally, I would say that they should prepare themselves, because
Mhm.
the election or the campaign or covering a movement or a campaign would be really would require a lot of stress emotionally and physically, even mentally. And with the way the election is going right now, it can really take a toll of your mental health. So I think they should do a lot of preparation for themselves. In terms of, in the lens of DevCom covering the campaign or the movement, I think they should also ready themselves with, um, they would, because they will be covering for following or trailing this campaign or movement. It will take them a lot of time to be with the organizers or to be with the supporters. So there's a lot of things that they should also be preparing, different lenses that they should look into. The lens of the organizers, but they can also try to interview the people, the volunteers. Could also be different lenses that covers the entire campaign or the movement.
Professor Ipe, what
I
are
think
the landmines to avoid? I mean, you've already pointed out the conflict of interest areas. Other than that, what are the landmines to avoid for for an enterprising journalist who wants to do justice to what he or she is covering? But there might be some landmines.
I can
Uh,
think of
what
one.
could
No?
they be? Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
Journalists, I think, should watch out for artificiality of political movements or bandwagons. No,
Hmm.
there might be a possibility of PR practitioners or publicists or political operators, no, trying to take advantage of a certain amount of naivety in among journalists, no, the vulnerability of journalists, no, and baka maniwala, no, sa Tagalog, no, sa sulsol, no, ng mga campaign operators, no. So in this age of fakery, no, uh, disinformation, we should watch out for that. No? Kasi there might be, there might be copycats. No, for example, this whole thing about caravans. No,
Mhm.
which was started by the Robredo campaign. After that, all the other candidates had their own caravans. No, so maganda tingnan which ones are bottom to top, or from coming from the grassroots, or which ones were heavily organized by political operators. No, I think it's interesting to find out.
Thank you. Professor Rach, how about you from the point of view of DevCom? What maybe is one landmine, journalistic landmine to avoid?
I think siguro po, na naiisip po, one thing is that there's a tendency when you get too immersed with a campaign or movement, it may already um, parang it draws the line of your objectivity. Sometimes when you're too immersed with the campaign or the movement already, you've been with them for a few, siguro several months na magkakasama kayo because you're covering the movement or the campaign. Parang sometimes you get the parang uh, the Bisaya term is parang you become part of them already. So I think that's one landmine in terms of DevCo, because again, the purpose of you covering that event is to understand how that movement works in order for you to apply it in several communication strategies, particularly in voters education. Pero pag yung self mo has been too immersed that it already colors objectivity of your coverage, maybe it will also have an effect on how you will come up with your strategic communication in terms of a campaign to raise awareness on voters education.
This,
John,
yes, go ahead.
yeah, I think Rachel makes a good point. No, even before the political movements, no, this is an issue that needs to be confronted. No, um, because when some reporters get assigned to a particular campaign, after some time they become some sort of a fanboy or fangirl for that particular candidate. No, and in the recent campaigns, you can see this in their the campaign Viber groups. No, parang may pagka Stockholm syndrome. No, so we should remember na we are journalists covering the campaign, and we should maintain some sort of an arm's length distance from the people that we cover, even if you're um very close to them, covering the campaign, wall to wall coverage of the campaign.
How should the newsroom address that problem, Professor Ipe? Is it possible to rotate reporters in the middle of a campaign?
I would say reporters should always be prepared to be reassigned, to a different campaign. And of course, given na yon, when you cover the campaign, you need to have an independent coverage. Therefore, you have to pay your own way, board and lodging, transportation, etc., allowance.
Mhm.
You don't take money from the campaigns. You don't take money for, even if it's from volunteers. No? Otherwise, that's a big landmine, big conflict of interest. No? The reporter should
Uh,
always be willing to be reassigned.
that's a great point. A question for both of you. What about other campaigns? Do you see this supporter led, bottom up character applying to other campaigns, Iskos or Pings or Marcoses, for instance?
I can say from my personal experience with the supporters that I meet online and both offline, I think mas malakas po talaga yung movement with Leni. I know of friends who personally volunteer for here, at least here in Cagayan de Oro, who volunteer to yung pamigay ng lugaw. I also know of one person who actually volunteered her space as their headquarters for free. Um, I also know a lot of friends who are supporters of the other candidates, but not much activity as far as volunteerism is concerned.
Professor Ipe? I'm sorry, you're muted.
The BBM Sara tandem, you could make the argument that it's a demand from the grassroots supporters of their side of the political fence, no. Um, so we shouldn't think na this is only unique to one particular camp, no. So we also see signs of big base of support for other camps, no. Maybe stronger in the Robredo camp, similar energy level in BBM Sara camp, less so in Isco or Manny Pacquiao, no. But these camps all have the potential to generate their own buzz, so to speak.
So if a reporter were to try to define, no, which of the campaigns are truly supporter led, truly in the nature of movements, what are the key questions to ask? Uh, you mentioned, okay, presence of volunteers, right? Uh, but I think almost all political campaigns have some volunteers. You mentioned energy levels. I think that depending also on the charisma of the candidate, you would have many campaigns energized, more energized than their rivals, for instance. Would it be the bottom up financial support, people paying their own way instead of going to the rally, for instance, to receive money? Would that be the main criterion? I'm just trying to understand how we can define how we can distinguish a campaign from a movement.
I hope the ideal scenario would be data on very detailed information on campaign donors would be available. No, things
Mhm,
like
mhm,
average campaign donations. No,
mhm, mhm.
um, salaries paid to staff, and if it shows that these campaigns are not really paying huge money on campaign staff, then that it would seem that the campaign really is supporter led rather than party led or political organization led. No? So I haven't really thought of that question, but that's a nice thing to think about. No? How do we determine if this political movement really is from the grassroots or not?
And some of the types of reporting that you mentioned, we're not really used to doing that in the Philippine setting,
That's true.
right? Even just the question, how much of your campaign donations go to pay your staff, that's not really asked. So maybe we should start asking.
Siguro
Uh,
John, we could also look at who are the people around these candidates, no? So for example, in your guests earlier, these are civil society people, Dan Songko, no, volunteers like Yvette, no? Who are the people behind these candidates? If you see the trapos behind these candidates, no? So this baka lang to, more of the same. Pretending to be a political or social movement pero hindi naman pala. Trapo candidates pala. No?
Maybe one last question. I'll leave the last word to Professor Rachel, who is in Cagayan de Oro, obviously, the gateway to Mindanao. I have a question. Can we compare the 2022 election landscape with 2016? I mean, from your point of view, was there a similar kind of energy, a similar kind of volunteerism present in 2016, in 2015 to 2016 when Duterte was running?
I can say that it's actually quite similar. Yung experience ko po with 2016 elections and 2022 election. First, I think there's really a clamor back then for Duterte to really run for president. I remember a time where many people here in Cagayan de Oro City would volunteer to be watchers in precinct halls, some of them for free, and of them would really bring in steamed banana, parang saging,
Mm-hmm.
to pang snacks ng mga tao. So I'm seeing a similar scenario with Leni's movement. In terms of campaigning, I think there's also a difference. There's similarity, there are differences as well. But kasi by in 2016, parang that's when we're starting to use the social media. Right now, we're already at its peak. In fact, nagiging weapon na yung social media.
Mm-hmm.
We can use it for disinformation or for information. I resonated to what Professor Ipe mentioned a while ago, that maybe we can also look into the social media as Facebook managers. You can also look into Facebook page ads from political pages on how much they spent
Mm-hmm.
for a particular campaign. How many ads and how much do they spend for each ad? So I think it's also a good thing to look at that.
All right. Still so many questions left to ask, but we're out of time. Maybe we should return to the topic next year. Allow me to thank you, Professor Barakias and Professor Salvosa.
Thank you,
Thank you,
John.
John.
Thank
Thank you for your
you.
time. That's it for us tonight. Join us again next Wednesday. Follow us on the campaign trail because it isn't just elections as usual. This is John Nery. Good night.